All right, now we're going to move on to now talking about what our goals are when we're in the bottom position, whether it's the guard or any other position where I'm on my back and Rory is trying to do some damage to me. So our first goal, and this is not related specifically to bottom position, but just to reiterate the point, always in jiu-jitsu, I want to maintain my alignment, my base, my posture and structure, and I want to disrupt my opponent's alignment before I think about doing anything else. If I attempt anything without some sort of alignment break against my opponent, I'm unlikely to be effective. So we'll be keeping our posture, our structure, our base, and the overall goal of the bottom position from the guard is going to be to manage distance first. I need to make sure that Rory can't get close to me. If he starts to get close to me without me interfering, you notice he broke my posture. Now all of a sudden I went from having an effective guard to him about to pass my guard to him about to choke me. So I need to continuously manage the distance, provided I'm achieving that goal. So if I've got good frames, my feet can be in his way, my arms can be in his way, my shins can be in his way. If I'm achieving that goal first, if I'm managing the distance, then my next goal is to off-balance him. You might have heard the term Kuzushi. It's a judo term that means off-balancing. And if I don't off-balance somebody, I will not achieve that alignment break very well. The optimal way of attacking from the guard is to treat it like, if you haven't heard of Marcelo Garcia yet, please look him up. If you're interested in doing jiu-jitsu, you need to know who Marcelo Garcia is. A very good description of Marcelo Garcia and his style of guard play is that he doesn't so much play guard as he plays judo from his butt. So if he's here like this, he's moving you around, and that creates opportunities to attack. So I'm maintaining the range between myself and my opponent through a series of frames, and then through a series of off-balancing motions, I can start to attack either sweeps or submissions. So my goal from the guard, from a more I guess macro perspective, is I want to submit him. I want to sweep him and get on top. So for instance, if I'm in the closed guard and I manage to get across to here, sweep him, now I'm in the top position, and I'll have a set of goals that I want to achieve from there. But looking at it from the overall I want to sweep or submit someone perspective is not how you want to go about it, because you're going to be looking at the end and not the process, and it's only the process that allows you to achieve the end.
Yeah, and that can take a lot of time to develop. Once again, you're picking a guard that you're going to be working on, or more of an open style when you're first learning some of the fundamentals. That Kuzushi part, that's huge, because you will practice techniques and you'll be like, okay, well, I've worked the tripod sweep, I got this. And then when you get into rolling, you might be able to make this happen on some of the people within your level or lower. But as soon as you go against higher belts, especially the instructor, you're just like, everything I just worked on doesn't work.
Yeah.
You might have that technique actually drilled quite proficiently, but if you can't set it up and if you can't create that vulnerability first in your opponent's alignment, you're never going to make this happen.
Yeah, so the Kuzushi movements and the alignment breaks, those are the context that allows you to achieve the techniques that you'll be learning. Without those things, you're going to have very limited success. As far as the guards, how you want to think, because the guard is primarily a range management tool. It's designed to first keep you safe before it allows you to attack. You want to think of your guards in terms of range. So if Rory is, let's say, standing, a spider guard would be a fairly long range guard. De La Hiva, which is an outside hook guard, would be a fairly long range guard. As he starts to move closer to me, I might play, let me switch sides, single leg X, which is a little bit closer, right? And then even if we move to X guard, it's a little bit closer. If he's on his knees, knee shield half guard, now all of a sudden we're a little bit closer. Or if I was playing seated butterfly guard, would be fairly close. Deep half guard would be the closest range guard because Rory's hips are basically on top of me, right? Closed guard is intermediate range because his hips are not getting too close to me. I can still manage the distance. So you're going to want to have, as a guard player, a longer range guard and a closer range guard. And as you progress through your journey, you'll want to have more intermediate steps.
Yeah, because the good thing about playing at these further ranges, if you look at the different tools you have for frames, you have your feet, you have your shins, your knees, and around at your shins and knees, your hands will now be reaching out at the same length. Then you have falling back to your elbows. And when you have longer range guards, you have more to fall back on when that starts to fail. So when Rob's playing more of a spider guard, or even just open guard at the hips, he's at his feet, which means he has his shins, his knees, and his hands, all of his arms to use after. So as soon as I start managing to make something happen at all, we can see how he can correct his positioning and have a lot to fall back to. Where something like deep half guard, not that there's anything wrong with deep half guard and using this as like a main guard, but especially as a fun for beginners. If I manage to pull my leg out,
no.
I go right to side control. I can go right to the back. So he has less to fall back onto. Obviously, there's reasons why you want to play that style of half guard, but especially from a fundamental perspective, I'd recommend working on some of the further range guards first, and then as we had kind of talked about before when we went through the positions, you will have to work on positions like half guard and deep half, because people will force themselves into those ranges, and you're gonna have to be comfortable at least being able to defend yourself.
Yeah, and then the last thing we want to think of when we're when I say the last thing, I mean like the last thing I want to think, but the last thing we're going to cover before we move on to the more dominant positions is I can play guard seated and I can play guard on my back. The advantage of playing guard on your back is you've got more frames. The advantage of playing guard seated is you've got more mobility and you can wrestle up a lot easier. We usually recommend people start with a seated guard so they can really develop their hand fighting and keep people at a distance, whereas most of the time you're actually probably going to end up playing your guard off your back, and you're going to be having to deal with a lot of guard passing. And playing off your back allows you to develop more guard retention skills. Playing off of your butt allows you to keep more distance management, wrestling up, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's going to depend on also like what your goals are right there. And like if you watch the beginning of jiu-jitsu competitions, especially with like leg locks becoming such a meta, people sit so that then they could advance and put the pressure on from bottom. Yeah. Rob can chase me from here. Yeah, close that distance really quickly, where when he's on his back, he's kind of just stuck here like a turtle. And so you're going to be naturally more reactionary at this point, where he's like, you got to be pretty confident, especially if you're going up against like better practitioners or even just people that are slightly better than you in your gym. If you go like this, know that you're working more on your retention, or even if you are going to be setting up into different guards and stuff, it's more reactionary. Because I'm going to be getting these grips first usually, and then Rob's going to be working, and then if he manages to set up a guard, fantastic. He's turned the offense in his favor, but he has to be able to turn that back around, where when he's seated, it's much easier for Rob to push the pace.
Yeah, so now we've kind of covered what you should be thinking about when it comes to the guard. You are going to obviously get into situations where somebody is getting past your guard. It's going to behoove you to develop guard retention. We're going to cover what we think are the 2 or 3 most important guard retention movements to learn later on. But just know that, let's say if I've got Rory in some sort of guard, as long as I have some grips, some frames, some hooks, I'm actually playing guard. We would call this the maintenance phase. There are 3 phases of guard. There's engagement, where we're hand fighting and trying to get our grips. And then the winner of the engagement phase, let's say I won, I'm now playing guard. And so I'm in the maintenance phase, which allows me to off-balance Rory and try to sweep him or submit him. If Rory had won the engagement phase and he's got good grips on me, now I'm not playing guard so much as I'm trying to keep my guard from getting past. So Rory is in the passing phase. I need to be focused on framing him and getting my feet and legs back into a good guard. So I will be performing guard retention. Guard retention is sort of the glue that makes all this stick together. If you don't have guard retention, it doesn't really matter how good your guard offense is, because if somebody puts you on the defensive even slightly, and you don't have the ability to retain and recover your guard, your offense is never going to come into play. So that's sort of the next thing we need to address. And then as we get to a situation where Rory has started to get past my guard, we're going to be in the recovery phase, where before he solidifies side control, like let's say Rory gets fully cross-face underhook, now he's got side control. But until that phase, I could still potentially perform a guard retention movement and get myself back to guard. Even if he's just kind of solidified it, I could potentially, hip escape and recover my guard. So that's going to be the next stage, where I've been mostly beat, but he hasn't solidified the position. If you're interested in competing, you should know that the rules in most tournaments are going to state that the top person has to solidify the position for 3 seconds. You're going to find out, depending on the referee, that 3 seconds can be 1 second if they like the top person. It can be 5, 6, 7 seconds if they don't like them. So don't count in your head 3 and think it's done. Look at the ref, know that it's happened. But as the person on bottom, those theoretical 3 seconds afford me the opportunity to, if Rory gets again into that position, even let's say Rory mounts me, and as he does, I quickly explode and get my legs back in. then I will not have given up the guard pass for the purposes of points.
That's going to be like a key part, because when people are first developing these techniques, and especially if they're not really thinking about competition, they don't really stress the importance of that last little bit of that fight. And what we end up doing a lot is we concede position. Someone knocks us down to our butt, but they haven't technically swept us yet. We could fight up, but we just choose to fall to our back. They get 99% past their guard, so we're like, he's past their guard, so I'm going to now just go concede to this bottom position. I'll start working on my escapes. And then you're missing a very key point where it's much easier to escape before they've really solidified a dominant position.
Yeah.
That'll shut everything down. And also, when you're working on guard passing, when you start to notice guys, when you go up against guys that are thinking about competition, that last fight that people will put out before you manage to hold for that 3 seconds to get the points, it's a very key part, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, and this is an overall sort of guiding principle in Jiu-Jitsu, which is that it's much easier to get things done in transition than once they are established. So if I'm going to try to recover my guard after I've let somebody fully establish the side control, the mount, whatever, I'm going to have a much harder time than if I catch them in that transition. And in terms of your level of diligence and your level of follow through on, like, this is bad. If somebody's going to get past my legs, they've effectively cut my body in half, right? Like, bottom negative positions are bad because it's my arms against Rory's entire body. So I want to make sure that I kind of give it everything I've got to prevent that worst case scenario from happening.
Yeah, it depends on the training partners that you have, because I've been guilty of that a lot, where it's like, it's a lot of energy to try and keep this person back in guard retention, especially as they start to get to later stages of guard retention. And then I'm just like, I'm just going to concede side control. I'm going to rest there for a bit, and then I'll escape when I want.
Yeah.
That's cool if you're way better than the person that you're going up against. But when you're training against people that are as good as you, or especially as you're training against high-level people, brown belts, black belts, competitive black belts, you're just going to eat shit that whole time.
Yeah.
And so you got to learn that it's like, no, guard retention, like, it's one thing to play in the gym and learn. You can certainly concede positions for the purposes of that. But when we're talking about self-defense, when we're talking about competition, you cannot let your guard get past, because you might not ever get to recover back from that.
Yeah, that's a good attitude to have. It was a big sort of watershed for me when my coach, Charles McCarthy, back in the day was like, you got to fight for your guard like it's your life. Like, if your guard gets past, you're going to lose the fight, you're going to lose the match, you're going to lose whatever. So just try to keep that in mind. Having said that, your guard will get past. So you've done everything you can. At a certain point, you're going to have to make the decision that, the guy's got me, right? Like, Rory's gotten let's say his elbow in here, he's gotten my hips boxed in, I can't get my knee in, I can't quickly turn up on an underhook and wrestle up. I've been put in a compromised position. We go back to alignment now. So my goal on bottom in a negative position is going to be to maintain my alignment and then try to break Rory's alignment. The problem with that is, from a negative position, it's much harder for me to break Rory's alignment than it is for Rory to break mine. If I keep good structure here, I've got my elbows in, I'm framing Rory's shoulder. This is a pretty good job on my part. I'm keeping my knee tight to his hip here so he can't immediately advance to mount. I've got base, I've got posture, I've got structure. But if I start reaching to maybe break his posture, oh crap, I'm gonna get choked in a real hurry. So it's not my job to be aggressive about breaking Rory's alignment. It's my job to be conservative and hope that he makes a mistake. So for instance, if Rory overcommits on trying to mount me and starts raising his center of gravity, I can flip him, I can roll him over by bridging and trapping his arm. So in the bottom positions, it's my job to stay safe, keep my alignment. Side control will be escaped generally by either bridging and hip escaping back to guard, or by gaining an underhook, which allows me to start to build up and wrestle my way up, which will usually cause my partner to retreat. I may reverse him, or he may back away a little bit, and I may end up playing guard at that point. So those are the two ways that I'll be getting out of it. And then if Rory mounts me, it'll be basically the same thing. I want to maintain my alignment. I don't want to start trying to bench press him off of me. That's going to give two giant levers to him to attack and start thinking about breaking my arm. I'm going to try to constantly be off balancing him if I can, setting up frames and replacing my guard. Or if I'm able to trap one of his posts, I should be able to take him over. That is the escape you're most likely to learn. It's also the escape that's least likely to work. The trap and roll thing that you'll see in Jiu Jitsu is extremely difficult to do on anyone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it has its place.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't work.
Yeah. But if it's the only thing you're looking for, anyone that gets to mount that's worth their salt is going to be like, yeah, you're not going to overhook one of my arms or grab me in any way.
So again, we'll get into some escapes from the bottom position, but for the most part, I'll be looking to make frames, create a little bit of space, and put my knees, we call it a scaffold, where I've created this box or framework that my partner's weight is on top of. And then, so if you just go back to mount, it's easier to demonstrate. So I've got Rory's weight pushed up onto that scaffold. My elbow is supporting his left leg, my other elbow is supporting his hip. I've created with my left hip a bit of space, and now my knee can come inside of that scaffold, which then creates a supplementary frame, which means I can now use my hands for other things while I elevate him and put him into a guard. So that's going to be our primary method. There'll be a couple other ways.
Yeah, and so if like you are actually still watching this, any of those little techniques that we talked about, like the 1-2 options for escaping side control, escaping mount, we are going to be getting into those and actually going into more detail. This is just like a real overview to kind of give you that understanding so that, once again, if you haven't trained Jiu-Jitsu yet, you're kind of watching this video before you're actually like attending a class, you kind of have a bit of an understanding, but this can also start giving you a little bit more of a roadmap of what you're supposed to be trying to achieve. So you can be more of a conscious grappler in the sense of, instead of just spamming techniques that you learned that day and you're just kind of like, I don't understand what's working, you can have a little bit more of an understanding of what's going on between the two people.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate this idea of relative alignment, you are going to learn escapes from negative positions. You are going to learn escapes from submissions. Banking on those to work because you know them and can just like spam them like you're hitting the B button in a video game.
I've done that. I'll just let them get to the armbar and escape the armbar.
So I'll skip the armbar. Yeah, that's very unlikely to work. Just know that if you view everything from the perspective of that alignment relative to the opponent, me maintaining my base, my posture, my structure, me looking to access a frame lever dynamic, that's what's going to get me out. And in a negative position, I'm kind of like walking a tight wire. If I make a mistake, I fall and die. My opponent can make mistakes, and the worst thing that'll happen to my opponent is they'll get put back in guard. The consequences are much lower. And I also have to do more as the person in the negative position. Like my opponent has to make a mistake, and I've got to do a couple things in a row right. Whereas if my opponent makes one mistake and I do one thing right, they can regain the position or maintain it very easily.
And this is where, like being on bottom, if you are going up against someone that is bigger and stronger than you, you are going to feel that disadvantage more because you're going to be bearing their weight through gravity.
Yeah.
And they're not going to necessarily have to work anywhere near as hard in some of the positions. There's going to be some positions with like guard retention, with setting up frames and scaffolding, that you're going to be able to be quite efficient.
Yep.
But you're going to probably want to get on top as soon as possible when you're going up against someone who's significantly bigger than you.
Exactly. And just so from bottom, know that throughout this process of learning, if you, let's say you get mounted and you try to escape and you attempt 5 escapes and one of them works, that's good. That's really good. Don't expect the move to work just because you tried it. There's a context, there's a level of effort, and there's a mistake that needs to happen on the part of your opponent for you to be successful. And so if you know that, you won't be frustrated. If your instructor just taught you, hey, there's this easy thing that I can do to escape the mount.
Every time.
Your instructor might be a bit of a liar, or they might just not realize how much of a difference there's. Like if you've been doing jiu-jitsu for 10 years and you're pretty good at it, you might have forgotten how hard it is to escape the mount if you're a white belt and someone's better than you. It's extraordinarily difficult. Don't let that frustrate you. You've just maybe received some bad information. You will struggle to escape negative bottom positions mightily until you're just a lot better than the other person. But when you're a lot better than someone, you can do things that sort of violate the basic rules.
Yeah,
you know,
when you and I get down in positions on each other as black belts,
yeah,
the other person does not escape, or it takes minutes to usually escape. And it's usually just one screw up that has led to that. So
so we can let any of our white belts, blue belts, even purple belts get a dominant position on, and we can just escape. So that doesn't mean that it's easy. It's just easy for us because we're going against people who we are better than. So.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. In the next video, we're going to cover what our goals are from the top position.